Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this week's edition of Defense News Weekly, find out just how many new attack submarines the U.S. Navy wants to buy, along with how the U.S. Army is working to get soldiers the latest equipment. We'll also see Norway's F-35s become operational and get an update on arming strikers with lasers. With in-depth interviews, up-close video, and leading analysis, this is Defense News Weekly. Welcome to this week's edition of Defense News Weekly. I'm Jeff Martin. We've got a big show for you this week, including an interview with the Army's top acquisition official. But before we get to that, here's a look at some defense headlines from this week. Up first is that Norway has declared Initial Operating Capability, or IOC, for their F-35 fleet, making them the third European country to do so after the UK and Italy. Norway has been working towards this for quite a while, and they plan to deploy 52 of the fifth-generation fighters for their Air Force. So now that IOC has been declared, what's next? Well, in 2020, Norwegian F-35s will deploy to Iceland to take over air policing, and by 2022, enough aircraft and people will be ready for the fleet to begin quick reaction alert for Norway's airspace, a mission for which they'll be operated from northern Norway. And Finland is warning that bids for their fighter replacement program have to stay within the country's $11 billion budget limit. 5 aircraft are competing to replace the Finnish Air Force's FA-18 Hornets, including the Lockheed Martin F-35, Eurofighter Typhoon, Boeing FA-18 Super Hornet, Saab Gripen E, and the Dassault Rafale. The plan is to announce a winner in 2021 and field the new fighter later in the decade, as the Hornets are planned to be retired by 2030. And the United Kingdom has signed a $3.6 billion contract for more than 500 Boxer armored vehicles, designed to be at the core of the United Kingdom's new strike brigades along Ajax fighting vehicles. The British plan is to buy a mix of infantry, command, ambulance, and other variants. And initially, those vehicles are going to be built in Germany, but production will then eventually shift to the United Kingdom under a joint venture between Rheinmetall and BAE Systems. Deliveries are set to start in 2023. And the U.S. Navy has slashed the number of Block 5 Virginia-class submarines in a long-awaited contract from 11 to 9 boats. The news, first reported by Bloomberg, is a jolt to the Navy's submarine building efforts, which have seen the supply base strained and confidence in sustaining higher build rates drop. That strain was especially apparent with the delivery of the final Block 3 submarine, the Delaware, which was 9 months behind schedule. And as for the details of the Block 5 contract, 8 of the 9 boats are to be equipped with the Virginia Payload Module, which will add more missile capacity. There's also an option for a 10th boat if needed. But congressional reaction to this news hasn't been pretty, with both Republicans and Democrats saying that the Navy needs to address an attack submarine shortfall, and that an 11th Block 5 boat is a huge need. Now, these issues with building attack submarines come as the Navy needs to keep focused on the Columbia-class program, which is designed to replace Ohio-class boomers. One of the Army's top, but often less visible priorities is to increase the capabilities of infantry soldiers. So at AUSA 2019, I caught up with the Capabilities Development Manager for that cross-functional team on how they're going about doing that.
In concert with developing these capabilities, we've also defined the close combat force for the Army. The close combat force consists of about 100,000 soldiers who fill those billets in the brigade combat teams, basically at the company level and below. Infantry, scouts, engineers, medics, and forward observers, the medics and forward observers assigned to the platoon level. So, that ability to slice up the large ticket items that normally would go to a number that was too expensive allows us to target a particular segment of the population that closes with and destroys the enemy, and that's their primary mission on the battlefield, and give them capabilities to do so.
Kind of what's next? So you've fielded ENVG soldiers. What's kind of your next, you see over the next couple of months might be getting out to the field?
Well, continued fielding of that capability. In the next couple of months, we will continue to refine some of the other capabilities through additional testing and soldier touch points. We'll have some releases to industry in regards to future efforts that we want to see them participate in. The cross-functional teams have a relationship with industry that I've been doing this for 8 years and I've never really seen before. The ability to have the program executive officers and the program manager offices work on requests for information from industry and asking them, as opposed to, hey, can you guys just do this? Bring to us your best capability, and then taking that capability and then refining it through those soldier touch points.
So making it more of an
hand in hand.
exchange?
Yes.
Make it more of an exchange than a, here's what I want, go do it?
Yes, exactly right. And them wondering, the hows and the whats and the whys, they're a part of that development. So it is, it's very gratifying, former infantryman myself, to see us doing it this way.
To keep up to date with all of our coverage, be sure to visit our Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn pages. Also, be sure to add us on Apple's News app and other platforms for the latest updates. And when we come back, we're going to sit down with the Army's top acquisition official. Dr. Bruce Jetty is the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology, a role that has seen change with the establishment of Army Futures Command. So at AUSA 2019, Jen Judson sat down with Dr. Jetty to discuss the way ahead for Army acquisition.
All right, well, thank you so much for taking the time today, and I know AUSA is busy for you, so I really appreciate it. I wanted to ask you, a year ago we're developing a framework for how Army Futures Command and acquisition would work together. So I'm hoping you can talk about how the framework has evolved and how you've solidified a relationship that works.
I think the best way to help people understand acquisition's relationship to Army Futures Command, I talked about it in one thing I was involved with this morning. I'm coming up on my 50th class reunion for West Point in a couple of years. I was reminded by a classmate last night. Pretty depressing, because I remember being a cadet out on the parade field looking over and going, those guys are almost dead. But here I am, and the benefit of having been around for a while is that I've seen a lot of the system and how it worked. In the past, I think that the acquisition process we've always been based on requirements. The requirements were built in the old days by them and them and them and them and them, and the integration of those requirements, there was no one to talk to bring them together.
Right.
With Army Futures Command being newly created, the newly created entity, you put a new entity down in the middle of the battle space, and there's going to be bumping around the edges trying to figure out, well, wait a minute, I used to be doing that, and who's going to do that now, and why are you doing that? I used to ask them. So we had some tussling to try and figure out exactly where the boundaries were and how we worked across those boundaries and those type of things. But the biggest benefit is that requirements used to be a block that you got developed over here in the requirements side, and then you got the acquisition side, and they come together just long enough to transition the requirement there, and there was no vote on this side. You've given me something impossible to do, or you just execute.
Yeah.
And so now, all my PMs and PEOs, they all have combat patches. They all have been company commanders, at least. They've got 6 or 7 years of operational branch time. Now then they move off into the material development side, and they get very experienced there. And then back on the Army Futures Command side, they of course have much more experience in the operational side.
Yeah.
So we're bringing them together like this. And then we're totally, General Murray and his people will talk to me and the PMs and PEOs about acquisition strategy, because they're learning.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about operational concepts they may not consider from a materials perspective.
Okay.
So this linkage I'm still responsible for acquisition, they're still responsible for requirements.
Okay.
But it's a much more integrated approach.
Okay. What happens if you reach an impasse in a decision? The acquisition community believes it should go one way, and Army Futures Command believes it should be, executed in another way. How do you resolve those issues if you're at a point where you just, you have completely opposing viewpoints in terms of how something should proceed?
Well, particularly for my position is established by law, and there are a lot of legal requirements for me, and I'm held legally accountable for certain things. So the Army is under civilian control, and that's part of the law and the Constitution. So we very carefully try to make sure that we abide in those laws and constitutional obligations. If there should become an impasse, if there's truly one that we can't resolve, then what generally we'll do is bring it to the Army senior leadership. So the chief, the secretary will sit down. I don't want to dictate an outcome.
Right.
And I don't want General Murray to dictate something that I can't accomplish.
Okay.
So we go back to the secretary and the chief. Secretary and the chief will sit there and make a determination as to what they'd like as a final outcome in most cases.
Okay.
I will tell you that we haven't had to go there yet.
Okay. Okay. And there was an instance, and you may not be able to comment on that, and I understand, but when it comes to the optionally manned fighting vehicle, there's quite a bit of buzz that the acquisition community believe that maybe there should be some more flexibility in terms of ensuring that competition stayed, that there was competition in the program, and now we're at a situation where there's one bid sample and no competition, and that potentially Army Futures Command wanted to stick to a schedule. So there's that concern that there's already a little bit of disagreement going on between the two of you, and I understand that there's this is competitive and there's legal issues. So if you can't comment, I completely understand. But it's one of those examples that what happens if you don't have competition? What are your options, and how do you come to a decision together?
So let me break it in a couple of pieces. I think there are basically three pieces.
Okay.
We go back to the fundamentals. By Title 10, most of the obligations that we follow are based on what Congress has passed as law. Past presidents have signed. By Title 10, the Chief of Staff of the Army is responsible for the requirement. Schedule is included in the requirement. Then by Title 10, then the Secretariat has a responsibility for the execution of the acquisition strategies and acquisition behind it. We, of course, like I said, try to find a way to optimize that exchange because the Secretary or the Chief has delegated most of that requirements definition into the hands of the General Murray and AFC. Certainly for the 31 major programs, and then we try to make sure that PMs and PEOs can work it out as best as possible. If we have, part of this give and take is if we have a difference of opinion, we'll let them know what it is.
Okay.
But if you want us to try and get something done in a particular time frame, then we do everything we can to make it a success. Okay. As to the OMFV, it's still a competitive category. I can't comment specifically on
Understood.
it. Let me though comment on competition in general.
Yeah.
And I'm going to use the M1 as an example.
Okay.
Versus the next generation combat vehicle. The M1 was built, there were a series of developments that were done. So I want to test out a turret, I want to test out an armament package, I want to test out an engine, I want to test out this. So these little prototypes were built, not a complete tank or a complete tank, but only with the particular focus on development of a sub-element as the critical piece.
Okay.
Then at some point, all those pieces were sort of proven out. And if you go to Fort Knox, I don't know if it's Fort Knox or I don't know if they moved it down to Benning. I've been to Benning, but I don't remember seeing them down there, and I do know they used to be at Knox.
Okay.
Were all these early tanks that preceded the M1. They brought them back together when they said, we got all the pieces, let's make an M1.
Yeah.
It gave us an awesome tank.
Yeah.
There is no better tank today. And the thing's, over 40 years old.
Yeah.
So we want to be able to keep a competition that brings these new ideas in, because those new ideas were good, but at the time we were in a competition where our acquisition process was slow, but theirs was slower.
Yes.
So the face of things changed slower. Technology changed slower. The ability to move forward in application of that technology was slower. But it was okay. Today, I need to build a system where competition is continuous and evolution is continuous. So, okay, maybe I'm not going to go for a 20-year plan. What if I can go for a 5-year plan?
Okay.
So I want 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0.
Okay.
1.0 and 2.0 may not necessarily be exactly the same vehicle. They may not be the same vehicle. They may not be, they may be a derivative of the prior vehicle. But the competition is a continuous ongoing process. In the meantime, just like these other little vehicles, we're working on what we call sprints, which are a series of technology developments, which are proofing the engine, proofing the gun, proofing the, and then what we do is, for all reasonable competitors, we offer to them that technology. So the winner of one, for example, can try and weave it into one and show us the next step as two. Or somebody who has something close and says, I'm going to put what you've got in, and then we're going to offer 2.0. So I think that in that way, we'll continue to have the best technology available on the battlefield.
Okay, so if you look at it more, system by system, and how it can come together, then that keeps competition in, as opposed to just trying to buy a full-up vehicle. Say was not, necessarily the right path.
When in the past the philosophy has been, I'm going to design a doohickey and everybody gets the same doohickey. I think you've heard the chief and the secretary both say during their talks that that's probably not the way that we're going to deploy things. We're going to have to deploy them sequentially. We're going to, as we sequentially deploy them, the capability of those systems are going to be improved. And it's not that they're the haves and have-nots, they're the haves and have a little bit mores.
Okay. And you build in the capability to take out and drop in more easily as technology becomes available that's better in certain areas. Basically.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I know I've kept you here for a little bit here, but thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it. And I hope you enjoy the rest of AUSA, which is, only a few hours left.
Oh, well, that's okay. I'm sure they're going to keep me pretty busy for those few hours, as I'm sure you are as well.
Coming up, we're going to take a look at the Army's work in space and putting lasers on strikers. On this week's Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Jeanette Mack offers her latest tips.
The holidays are right around the corner, and whether you're traveling, hosting, buying presents, or all three, expenses can and will pile up. With the right offer, a new credit card may be the right thing that gets you through the holidays. But there's a trick to it. It's called sticking to your budget. It's certainly not new, but people don't usually think about credit cards as a way to help manage and maximize your spending. The truth is, though, if you're looking for help with holiday spending, remember, almost all credit cards come with awesome sign-up bonuses for spending a certain dollar amount to receive huge bonus points or cash back, which works out really well if you know you're going to spend that amount. Other cards offer low initial intro rates, which could help you finance large purchases or maybe even offer 0% interest over a period of time. This could really help with affordability for things like round-trip flights home to visit your family. So credit cards really can be a great way to save while spending. Just be careful not to overspend. The idea is to purchase and be rewarded with low interest, bonus rewards, or cash back on things you were already budgeting to buy. That way, you know you'll be able to pay it off before the end of your intro period or purchase deadline. Now you're holiday shopping and saving like a pro.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next time. To get more defense news coverage, be sure to visit our website at defensenews.com. And subscribe to our Early Bird Brief, delivered to your inbox every weekday morning to get you ready to start the day. And coming up, we're going to get a look at the Army's work in space and putting lasers on strikers. With the stand-up of U.S. Space Command, all branches of the military are adjusting their space forces to work better under the new command. As for the Army, Lieutenant General James Dickinson, commander of the Army's Space and Missile Defense Command, and the man who's set to be the deputy commander at U.S. Space Command, says they've reorganized to better support. Here's what he told Jen Judson.
So in order to reorganize the command a bit to make sure that we provide efficient and timely support to U.S. Spacecom. So what we did is we kind of started with our satellite communications enterprise that we provide to the Department of Defense. And we took a headquarters planning element that I had in my G6 section, for example, highly trained, highly respected SATCOM experts. I pulled them in and I pulled the Signal Battalion out of the 1st Space Brigade, and I aligned them under the new United States Army Satellite Operations Brigade. And what that did, that allowed me to have a unity of effort, if you will, unity of command, having one colonel brigade commander in charge of the enterprise for not only the Army, but also for U.S. Space Command. And this allows us to be able to provide that support in really an increasing, growing type of satellite communications environment that we will face today and into the future.
Okay, and satellites are becoming increasingly important. I mean, we've had Army participate in terms of controlling satellites in space for a long time. That's been a big role. But now we're looking at how satellites can be useful beyond that. Can you elaborate a little bit on the importance of satellites beyond, communications and information transmission?
Well, satellites are incredibly important to us today, just given the distances that we operate over now, particularly in the Army, as we look to the future with long-range precision fires. Now we have to be able to see, shoot, and move, communicate over vast distances. And depending on the combatant command that you're operating in, it can be even greater distances, for example, in the Indo-Pacific. Thousands of miles, tyranny of distance, those types of things. We really rely upon satellites today and well into the future. So at Space and Missile Defense Command, we're looking at small satellite technologies, working with Army Futures Command to make sure that we're able to develop small satellites that are relevant to the combatant on the ground or the soldier on the ground. Being able to provide timely information down to the brigade combat team level is what the Army is interested in to do.
Okay. Talk about some of your recent accomplishments in terms of developing small satellites and where you're headed with that in the future, your participation in that.
So we've had a lot of success in Space and Missile Defense Command over the past few years in small satellite technology. We've done some communication satellites in the past, and we've just recently enjoyed the success of Kestrel I, which was about a year ago, where we deployed a small satellite into the LEO orbit, and actually were able to use it as an intelligence gathering, imagery gathering type satellite. And the value added to the soldier on the ground or the brigade combat team is the fact that imagery that it produces is relevant to them. We're able to get it to them on the ground in a timely enough manner with imagery that is good enough for them to be able to use it in their tactical environment.
Okay, and what are you doing going forward? I mean, Kestrel I was very successful, but where can you improve on that? What types of things are you looking at?
Well, we're really the department is looking, and the Army is looking at how do we create a sensor layer within space or in the LEO atmosphere, maybe even the MEO orbits, in order to have a redundant and resilient capability. So we'd have constellations of many satellites that are able to communicate to the ground and to themselves and be able to provide either satellite communications, intelligence, or even assured PNT.
Lasers on strikers? Well, it's coming faster than you might think. Here's what Jen Judson was able to learn at AUSA 2019.
When General Thurgood and the RCCTO was given the mission for directed energy in the Army, we went out and did an assessment. We kind of aligned current capabilities with missions, right? 50 kilowatts does a great job for the short-range air defense mission, right? So it doesn't address all of the threats, but it addresses a large fraction of those threats. Clearly there's more stressing threats out there, and there's potentially longer ranges. It turns out, to go down the NS&T rabbit hole a little bit, it turns out that scaling the power doesn't necessarily increase range a whole bunch, right? So it turns out that if you double the power, the range only goes by about the square root of 2.
Okay.
What doubling the power, or what increasing the power does, is it reduces kill time. So when we look at the types of scenarios we may be put in, we have many threats coming in, and we need to address those as rapidly as possible. And so, without commenting specifically on mission, scaling the output power, above 100, what that does is it minimizes kill time on each individual threat and allows us to address more.
Okay. Yeah, because I guess we're looking at swarming capability as one of the threats out there, and maybe multiple missiles, things like that. Is that seen in the realm of the possible, being able to, say, shoot down projectiles very quickly?
Yeah, so that's the idea. So we have two approaches, and we're calling them HEL IFPIC, high energy laser IFPIC, and high power microwave IFPIC right now. So the high power microwave solution addresses swarms of drones, and that's an investment that other services have made over time. The Air Force, and Navy, but the Air Force notably is deploying systems now to deal with that particular issue, and the Army is simply tracking, and will leverage that in the out years to deal with specifically swarms of drones. High-energy lasers will deal with kinetic threats.
That's all we've got time for this week, but if you want to see and read more, be sure to head over to defensenews.com. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.